Earlier today, key GOP senators delivered a letter to Republican leader Mitch McConnell, confirming their opposition to ramming through a Pelosi-Schumer omnibus spending bill in the final days of this lame duck session of Congress. Now, such a bill would lock in Democrat spending priorities through most of 2023, even though Republicans will take control of the House in just a couple of weeks. Now, with government funding set to expire in 2 days, what can we expect as the budget negotiations continue? Joining me now to discuss this and much more is one of the authors of this letter, Senator Ron Johnson. He serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Budget Committee. He represents the state of Wisconsin. Senator Johnson, welcome back to the program.
Oh, Tony, great to be back.
And by the way, congratulations on your re-election to the United States Senate.
Appreciate it.
All right, what's the status of the negotiations here as we're just a couple of days away from current government funding ending?
Well, the press is reporting that there's an agreement on a framework between Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans. From my standpoint, what I've been doing with a bunch of my colleagues is we've just been trying to point out the reality. One question I'm asking my colleagues as well as reporters, how much did we spend in total to the U.S. government last year? And what's interesting is just look at the expression on their face, because virtually no one knows. And then I try and absolve them of any guilt. I say, listen, it's not your fault that you don't know. It's because we never talk about it. And so what I've been doing over the last couple of days is providing those numbers. Let me tell you, listeners, last year we spent $6.3 trillion. In 2019, before the pandemic, we spent $4.4 trillion. Now, I realize that we had a pandemic, and I think we didn't spend very wisely during that pandemic, but we spent about $6.4 trillion more over 3 years than that $4.4 trillion baseline. And the point I'm trying to make is, if we were looking at a spending level for 2023, and let's face it, we're 2.5 months into this fiscal year, never brought up an appropriation bill, we'd be looking at spending about $4.8 trillion this year just by growing the $4.4 trillion by the population growth and inflation, $4.8 trillion. Another handy figure to have is last year, we had $4.9 trillion in federal revenue. What we're talking about, what's on the table right now with this omnibus, is $6 trillion. And the question I'm raising with my colleagues is, why are we looking at a $1.6 trillion increase in the baseline over 2019 spending, where the pandemic is by and large over? We're pretty well back to normal business. Why don't we return to something closer to the $4.4 trillion baseline? It's something people can't. It's a question people can't answer. The other thing I point out is, of the $6.4 trillion spent over 3 years, higher than that $4.4 trillion, $5.4 trillion of that went to mandatory spending. I would have expected most of that COVID relief going to discretionary spending. That once the pandemic was over, that spending would go away. And again, we're not getting answers to the question: why did $5.4 trillion of that spending get put into mandatory spending, which just proceeds without anybody even looking at it? It's really what's driving our deficits, what's driving the mortgage of our kids' future. So there are so many questions that need to be answered. And what I support was Senator Mike Lee's. We hate CRs. We don't want to support a CR, but we're willing to support a CR that funds the government through February 4th, so we have more thoughtful consideration of the spending bill. But again, leadership at both parties want to ram this thing through without any member really seeing what's in it. Drop a multi-thousand-page bill on our desk and expect an up or down vote within hours.
So just to recap what you shared with us, we're looking at over government revenue and government spending in this coming year based on what we're talking here, and we don't know everything because, as you said, they haven't provided the text. We're looking at about close to a $2 trillion deficit?
Well, it's hard to say what the deficit will be. What I can say is Treasury is expecting us to spend about $6 trillion this year. That compares to pre-pandemic spending of about 4.4. So that's an increase of about $1.6 trillion, about a 36% increase over what we spent prior to the pandemic.
What are they projecting the revenue to be?
Nobody's explaining why. Why would we be spending that much more than we did prior to the pandemic?
Well, we've grown government. I mean, you know how this works. Once you put money out there, you never get it back. There's this entitlement. All of a sudden, these departments feel like they have to have this money. And of course, the Democrats have used it to buy a lot of votes, it looks like. What about the debt ceiling? I've not heard much said about the debt ceiling. Is that going to be a part of these negotiations?
Well, that's generally what Senate leadership does on a bipartisan basis. They use these must-pass pieces of legislation to push through with nobody basically really even knowing it, either a dollar increase to the debt ceiling or just simply suspending it. The debt ceiling has been increased so many times since I've been in Congress, can't even keep track of it. The whole debt ceiling was instituted to force some kind of fiscal controls to be attached to it. It should be an unpleasant vote, so unpleasant that it would prompt members to say, okay, basically vow to sin no more, to institute some kind of fiscal controls, which, by the way, it's our conference position that should we increase the debt ceiling, we're only going to support it if we attach to it things like full faith and credit, Preventing Government Shutdown Act, the REINS Act, some fiscal controls to rein in the size of government. We haven't been following our own conference guidelines there.
So, Senator Johnson, as I appreciate the situation, what Congress is poised to do is to put forth an omnibus, a massive piece of legislation that spends trillions of dollars that will lock in this 118th Congress for almost the entire first year of a budget where the priorities really reflect the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And again, $1.6 trillion higher than what we were spending pre-pandemic.
And generally speaking, activity in a new Congress happens in the first year. If they're going to take any tough votes, if they're going to do anything tough, it's going to happen in the first year, not the second year. So I would be shocked if in the second year of the 118th Congress, all of a sudden we have some battle over fiscal responsibility.
Well, that's always going to be a challenge here because the American public does like federal government benefits. And members of Congress are more than happy to deliver that. And it's easier to deliver that if you're never discussing the full extent of the problem. Again, the question I've been posing to reporters as well as colleagues, when he's asking them, how much did we spend last year? And the puzzled look on people's faces is priceless. It's because we never discuss it. We'll talk about certain elements. We'll talk about $10 billion here being spent for this worthy cause, or $200 billion being spent for that worthy cause.
Right.
We never put the entire budget together and put it in the context of the fact that we're already more than $31 trillion in debt, a debt level that far exceeds the size of our economy, and really talk about how this irresponsible deficit spending is fueling the inflation.
Right.
But one of the things I put out is, I've heard the number thrown about $858 billion for defense. Because we are a dollar at the start of the Biden administration is only worth 88 cents, that $858 billion is really only buying about $750 billion worth of product for defense.
What's the time frame that we anticipate some decision on whether we're going to have an omnibus or we're going to see a short-term CR into the next year?
Well, certainly within the next week, but might be a matter of days.
All right, we'll be watching that closely, and I hope you and your colleagues trying to hold the conservative line are successful in the 118th Congress hands. The Republicans' hands are not tied by this Pelosi-Schumer budget. I want to go to the border. This is something you've spoken about quite a bit. The administration saying the border is secure, but with the lifting of 42, the provision that allows them to expedite the removal of those in the country being lifted, coming into the country illegally, being lifted. What's going to be done here? This is a crisis.
It is a crisis. This administration won't even admit it's a problem. Secretary Mayorkas testifies before our committees and say it's a challenge. When they talk about a broken system, prior to their administration. They're talking about we just weren't as efficient at processing and dispersing as the Biden administration's become. Last time I did a pretty close calculation, this was months ago, more than 3 million people had come into this country, either encountered, processed, and dispersed, or come across as a known or unknown godaway. We got to be approaching 4 million people.
Right.
Since the Biden administration. To put that in perspective, 22 states have a population less than 4 million people. 17 states have a population less than 3 million people. So this is an enormous problem. It's going to become larger and larger. I mean, Tony, you realize this. We're the land of the free, home of the brave. We're a land of unlimited opportunity. So tens of millions of people, legitimately, or justifiably, want to come to this country.
Right.
We can't accept all comers. And the fact of the matter is, the human traffickers are some of the most evil people on the planet. This Biden administration's open border policy is facilitating the business model of some of the most evil people on the planet, probably to the tune of somewhere close to $20 billion a year. That's the amount of money we're putting into people's pockets. We have an HHS whistleblower that James O'Keefe uncovered through Project Veritas. And, basically saying that the federal government understands and realizes they're turning over these migrants to sex traffickers, to human enslavement. It's unconscionable. It's beyond a crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis.
There's so much this administration does that's inexplicable. It makes no sense. Not if you care about people the way they say they do.
You're right. They claim that their approach is more humanitarian, but what's humanitarian about setting this process where people sell children to become family units? We had one of the larger mass murders in U.S. history. It didn't involve a gun. It involved the trailer of a tractor trailer where 53 souls were lost because of extreme heat. From again, these are human smugglers.
Have the Democrats have the Democrats had any hearings on that?
No. When I was chairman of Homeland Security, we had more than 36 hearings. We have not had a hearing on the crisis at the border in Homeland Security. Not one hearing.
Speaking of hearings, you have to have your own kind of hearings in order to get information out, and we're not going to have enough time to cover this as it should be covered, but you had your second gathering of what's called the second opinion. You brought together medical experts to speak to the issue of the COVID vaccine and the information that's not getting out there. This is stunning to realize the information that the government is keeping under wraps and how they've been misleading the American people.
It is stunning. The perpetrators of this will never admit they're wrong. They can't afford to be proven wrong. The body count is far too high. And Tony, the problem is they have the power, the COVID cartel, the administration, health agencies, big pharma, our mainstream media, big tech, social media giants. They have the power to make it almost impossible to get the truth out. But yeah, we held an event last week. We called it COVID-19 vaccines, what they are, how they work, and how they can cause injury. 3 hours. It's available on Rumble. It has over 600,000 views already. Please share it around. The American public needs to have the truth. They need information so they can actually have informed consent as whether or not they want to take a booster, whether they want to subject their children to this experimental gene therapy, which is what it really is. It's not a traditional vaccine. We should have exercised far more caution. We should acknowledge the vaccine injury so these people can get help.
Right. And based on the testimony I've read through what took place in your hearing, that this is mutating and this vaccine that they're using is ineffective. In fact, it may be causing future problems for offspring of those who have gotten this vaccine.
Well, the vaccine biodistributes all over the body. It accumulates in things like the ovaries that could affect reproduction. Countries that are heavily vaccinated, they're experiencing the highest levels of COVID deaths. We've seen a real shift in excess mortality from the elderly to the more healthy population in terms of working age people. Germany just released some information showing that their deaths per week more than doubled at the start of 2021. It hasn't abated. There's so many safety signals out there that are just being ignored on VAERS. We have over 32,500 deaths reported worldwide. 26% of those are occurring on days 0, 1, or 2. The FDA, CDC, they're just shrugging. They're completely ignoring this problem. it should be concerning every American, and the American public deserves the truth. That's what I'm trying to provide.
And you're doing a great job at it, and I greatly appreciate it. Senator, we only got 30 seconds left, but the question I have is why? Why does the government sit on this? Why the collusion between big pharma and big government? What are they after?
Well, they wanted a mass vaccination program, even though they were warned that mass vaccination in the midst of a pandemic could cause the variants that we're starting to see right now. So again, the body count is way too high. They can't afford to be proven wrong, and they have the power to make it very difficult to prove them wrong.
Well, fortunately, we have men and women like you that aren't going to let them have the total say. And you're welcome on the program anytime to talk about those issues. We're grateful for you pulling back the curtain.
Well, God bless you and your audience. Very Merry Christmas.